Hey everyone, today I wanted to look over the origin, story, or meaning behind the characters' names, all of which begin with a "the" followed by a word or descriptor of what they are or do. The names of the killers were always something I presumed was done by the survivors, names given to them allowing them to easily identify each, especially as in some cases they wouldn't know their actual names, so that's kind of the angle I'm coming from when discussing these. The Trapper is a name that can presumably be put down to the simple fact that he has traps. However, it's worth mentioning that the survivors likely know who he is prior to the realm. He did the worst massacre in modern history according to the lore, and it's quite possible the name of Trapper was given even before he came to the realm. Much of Evan's lore centers around hunting and trapping animals, and even his father and workers eventually. He has traps in the realm. Trapper makes a lot of sense. The Wraith is the name of a type of ghost. Some definitions of the word help to give us an idea of how this name was decided on for him, primarily the part about a wisp or faint trace of something. To me, that's what embodies Wraith the best, is this remaining shell of the person he was before. His blank eyes, his flat expression, and his awkward pose and head tilt all add to this. He also has many ghostly features like the whoosh sound when he disappears and the spirals of mist when he cloaks. The hillbilly I imagine got his name probably from the survivors actually. Hillbilly as a term is classified as a derogatory term after all, and I could imagine in the survivors' frustration with being hunted down by the killers constantly, they wouldn't feel so bad applying these names. The meaning being, quote, an unsophisticated country person. The other source of this name could be from the entity, a demeaning term placed onto Billy to make him angry and drive his emotions during the trials. The nurse is a slightly odd one, and I think is one that does lean into the idea that the survivors came up with the names, because Nurse isn't actually a nurse, but she does look like one. She more than likely does pick up some skills when working at Crotus Pren, but she was never a nurse in the sense of being trained to be one. The Huntress is extremely straightforward, and we can imagine she had this name both out and in the realm. She's a hunter, that's pretty much it. The Shape is what Myers is referred to in the original Halloween, listed as the Shape in the credits. It refers to him being the shape of evil, and I believe often because of how he stalks in the distance and simply resembles a human shape. I think it's more of a nod toward how he's referred to in the films. It would make more sense if the survivors named him the Boogeyman, with that being the most common name he's referred to as by someone like Laurie, but the Shape also makes sense. The Hag is quite a striking name, especially because the character is likely only about 18. Hag usually invokes a much older person, the two most common definitions of the word being a witch and an ugly old woman. That's the kind of messed up thing here, is that there's a good chance the survivors may think she is an older woman, due to her incredibly torn and disheveled appearance. The name could also easily just be a reference to her being a witch too though, with how she scratches her symbols and introduced hex perks to the realm. The Doctor is more of an observation, with Herman looking like a doctor with his white coat. A bit like Nurse, the lore does suggest in some way that Herman may not have actually been a doctor too. Despite this, the name does come down to the visuals, and like Nurse, I think this name is scary because these roles of Nurse and Doctor, they're meant to be roles you can rely on, and so having them as killer names juxtaposes those feelings well. The Cannibal. Bubba's name means the survivors must know in some way that Bubba is one. Maybe they watched the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or maybe they just see in-game in some form to prove this. It could be because of the skin mask over his face. Ultimately, Bubba and his family were all like this though, capturing people who entered their land or house, and so the origin is quite literal. The Nightmare is definitely a more dramatic sounding name, with most of the survivors probably knowing him as Freddy Krueger. He gets his name though by being a dream demon who is able to put people to sleep. His presence within people's dreams is a nightmare, so the name Nightmare makes sense. It's fairly literal, I would say. The Pig is another quite blunt name. She has a pig mask on, and so she's called the Pig. The pig mask was worn by disciples of Jigsaw, used as disguises to kidnap different people for the games. The Clown is another fairly straightforward case. Again, a bit like Nurse though, Clown doesn't seem to actually be a clown. In his lore, I don't believe it ever actually mentions that he did performances with the circus, but instead using them to blend in. He may have picked up a few tricks however, evident in his fancy knife spins. The outfit he wears is actually a ringmaster's outfit that he appears to have stolen along with the caravan. Either way, he looks like a clown, so it makes perfect sense. The spirit is a character who is actually meant to be the entity's interpretation of an Onryo, which of course we got later on with Sadako, so the name is interesting. This to me seems like it's survivor given again, a case where they viewed her and landed on spirit as an appropriate term. She looks ghostly with her strange blue skin and her limbs strung together by nothing, it seems. The Legion is a name that originates from the characters themselves, and a name that someone like Jeff might have picked up on when he did the artwork up in the lodge. They decide on the name The Legion to be the name of their gang. Their other trial names were Soldiers of Mayhem and the Marauders of Mayhem. A legion is most typically a military term to describe a unit of soldiers, most famous in ancient Roman times. I think it's meant to make them sound intimidating and as if their reach is much farther than it really is. The Plague gets her name from carrying a plague. It's visible and rampant across her body, so it's a logical name from a survivor perspective, especially with her choice of attack being her projectile vomit. The Ghostface is again quite literal. The Ghostface mask is very famous, all the survivors are probably aware of it, and so I think seeing this killer, they likely decide to call him the Ghostface due to this very distinct and famous mask. The Demogorgon is more than likely referred to this name by survivors, as some of them may have seen Stranger Things. The name Demogorgon is applied to the creature by the gang in Season 1, when they encounter one during a D&D campaign, concurrently to the start of the strange events in Hawkins, and therefore name the creature the Demogorgon. The Oni is quite easily identifiable by his mask. Onis are Japanese demons, with some of their most common features being red or blue skin, horns, and carrying of a kanabo. As Oni quite closely resembles the folklore version of an Oni, it's likely the survivors connected the two. Oni Yamaoka was also a name Kazan picked up during his lore. It was meant as an insult, describing him as monstrous almost. This name in the realm therefore is meant to be a mockery of sorts toward Kazan, forcing him into this role of an Oni, which likely infuriates him. The Deathslinger is a name Caleb picked up after causing immense injury with his custom-made spear gun, a nickname likely meant to strike fear as he grew in fame as a bounty hunter. In Serena's lore, we also learned that Caleb was known as Mad Mick. I always found it slightly odd how this differs from his Deathslinger name, but I guess it's possible to have more than one nickname. The Executioner is a case I imagine where the survivors simply describe visually what Pyramid Head is, the large blade making him an executioner in their eyes. It's possible too that Cheryl gave some insight, with Pyramid Head actually being based on the executioners of Silent Hill's past, when he was conjured by James Sunderland. The name works well therefore, being literal but also tying into his origins. The Blight is an interesting one, and a name that could have been applied by the survivors after their adventures into the fog and Vigo's laboratory, where they appear to discover and interact with the blighted substance. It's likely discovery of the substance and reading of Vigo's journals that they would come to name the creature infected with this substance the Blight. The Twins is another fairly literal one. It's quite possible that Elodie actually shared her knowledge on them as she read about them in her lore. Charlotte and Victor are twins, with them being conjoined at birth. So, the Twins. The Trickster was a name that Ji-woon came up with himself. After his bandmates from No Spin died in the studio fire, he became a solo act, rebranding as the Trickster. I believe this carried over to the realm because there's a good chance the survivors knew who he was prior to the realm. Adam, for example, is noted to have gone to see one of Trickster's concerts with his students, so he would definitely know who he is. The Nemesis is sort of a nickname, or shortened version of its full name, the Nemesis T-Type. The naming coming from a combination of the Tyrant's two main sources, the NE-alpha parasite, and a Tyrant created with the T-virus. It's likely someone like Jill could have shared the name with the other survivors, having read the files that refer to him as Nemesis. The Cenobite is a fairly broad term. His name in Hellraiser is the Hell Priest officially. Cenobite is the term used to refer to the demons that come from the labyrinth. The name therefore is still appropriate, but it is odd it wasn't exchanged for something more descriptive like the Hell Priest or the Pinhead, which was always a nickname given by fans. The artist was an artist in her prior life, and with her ink-like hand shaped into palette knives, it's reasonable to assume the survivors could land on this name too. Jone has some knowledge of her also. The Onryo is a type of Japanese spirit. They are usually out for revenge of some kind. Spirit does also seem to be an Onryo, so Sadako being named Onryo in the realm is somewhat interesting, although she does represent an Onryo visually far better than Spirit does, with her being an entity created Onryo, where Sadako appears to have become one naturally and with her power. So this naming is quite literal, it's just the name of the spirit. The Dredge is an interesting name, with it being referred to as the Druani in its lore. I'm not too sure why this didn't end up as the name, but again it could be because none of the survivors knew it as this. Dredge, from what I could tell, could refer to the process of dredging, which is clearing an area of water, ridding it of mud, rubbish, and so on. This may apply in the sense of Dredge clearing the Garden of Joy, said to be tainted with darkness. That's the best connection I could find, and could be why the survivors refer to it as this. Maybe I'm missing something there, I'm not too sure. The Mastermind is presumably a name that was given to him by the Resident Evil characters, with it not really being something you could pick up on unless you knew some backstory. Wesker was a scientist and assisted in the creation of many bioweapons, his magnum opus being Ouroboros, that he planned to release globally. Either this is an entity-given name driving his ego, a name he gave himself, or a name someone like Chris or Jill gave him, although I find that unlikely because that again kind of plays up to his ego. The Knight is another case of just looking at what the character is physically and applying that name to them. In Knight's case, the name is also correct. Tarhos was a knight. I've always liked the name as it's a nice contrast, the knight we see before us, and then the knight we might picture when we hear the term. Someone noble and righteous, yet this is the reality. The Skull Merchant is the name of the character from Adriana's father's dark mangas. It's what the visual design is based on and the character as a whole. Now in terms of the survivors knowing this, it's not that clear, because the manga was ultimately a failure, and so I find it unlikely that one of the survivors read it. So maybe Skull Merchant shared that somehow, I'm unsure. Personally, when looking at her character visually, I wouldn't be able to come up with the name Skull Merchant. Maybe something skull related, but probably not Skull Merchant. The Singularity is named this likely in reference to the meaning of singularity within the tech world, which is basically the idea of AI surpassing human intelligence, which is what happens when Hux touches the crystal. He gains a bunch of knowledge, and he views humans as worms and beneath him, disgusted by them as lower beings, and offended almost that they created him. The Xenomorph is another quite literal name for what it is, describing the creature. It makes sense though, especially because it's not human. Having a specification that it's a xenomorph makes sense. Equally though, something like the alien would have made sense too. Maybe the survivors have learnt from the Spirit Sadako situation, and so they're not going to use more generic terms anymore, just go with xenomorph specifically. Alright, well that's going to do it. I do hope you enjoyed, and let me know if you have any additional thoughts on the names down below. Thanks, and goodbye.